Hi there, I'm Ryan Chandler. Here's your talking points for this week. As our leaders gather with pro-life groups to plan the next steps after Roe, our neighbors to the west are ramping up to continue providing abortions to Texans. We'll hear from Congressman Jody Arrington and from the ACLU of New Mexico about their fight ahead. And that fight has all eyes on November. This week, a record number of Texans say our state is on the wrong track. We'll delve into what the latest polling from the Texas Politics Project means for the governor's office and for the future of Texas.
From the studios of KMAC Television in Lubbock, your local election headquarters. This is Talking Points.
And happy Sunday. Thanks for joining us. Lubbock Congressman Jody Arrington hosted Project Destiny and other pro-life organizations this week for something of a post-game celebration and a debrief to plan the next steps after the end of Roe v. Wade. Their message: this is not the end of the pro-life movement. In fact, the work will get even harder now to prepare for a post-Roe world and to expand abortions bans to every state. The congressman joined activists in stressing their responsibility to provide care and support for an increase in births that Texas is now anticipating. At the local level, that looks like providing counseling, health care, and more resources to public education. But at the federal level, the congressman said he'd be wary to attach any money to that goal, citing concerns for creeping federal mandates.
So much of the needs can and should be and are best met at the community level with community organizations that these folks represent. They know the person's predicament. They know there are underlying issues that need to be dealt with and brokenness that should be ministered to, or you're never going to get this person out of the cycle of a bad place. A government distant federal program cannot do that.
But one thing he thinks the federal government can and should do is ban abortion completely. On Thursday, Arrington telling us he would not only support, but would like to introduce legislation to ban abortion at the federal level.
I'd like to introduce it. I'm working on it actually right now, to take the state of Texas law, which basically prohibits abortion, except in the situation where the mother's life is at risk.
Now, Arrington did acknowledge that that proposal has, of course, no path for at least the next 2 years under President Biden, but the work will begin if and when the Republicans take the House this November, as he is anticipating. But just about 100 miles from here, the political universe is very different. New Mexico now serves as the closest resource for Texas women who are seeking abortions, and that's posing significant challenges both for Texas and for New Mexico. Our research shows the closest clinics to Lubbock are both about 300 miles away in Santa Fe and in Albuquerque, with other clinics able to better serve El Paso in Las Cruces and Santa Teresa. But New Mexico is a largely rural state home to just 2 million people, a disproportionate amount of which are impoverished populations or indigenous groups that have historically lacked access to health care themselves. So it's not so easy when their 29 million Texan neighbors knock on their door. Ms. Rushworth, my first question to you would really be, what has the atmosphere been like in New Mexico since the end of Roe? What have those preparations looked like in order to make sure that you can do as much as you can?
Sure. So here in New Mexico, we have known, unfortunately, for some time that it was very likely that the Supreme Court was going to overturn Roe and her sister cases. And unfortunately, that day has come. And here in New Mexico, we have always been a place where people have been able to access healthcare and abortion care safely and legally without governmental or political interference. And we will continue to do so moving forward.
For a state of 2 million people with only a handful of clinics, it can't be easy to suddenly try to welcome a state of 29 million people and serve everybody from Texas who needs an abortion. What kind of extra resources is the state planning to add to these clinics to make sure that they can meet the demand, or will they be able to meet the demand?
So, I'm going to pull us back a little bit, because the reality is, we abortion has largely been banned in Texas for quite some time. And so we here in New Mexico have been receiving patients from Texas since the 6-week ban went into effect. But the reality is, as we face this public health crisis and this constitutional law crisis, that around half the states in this country have or will ban a medical procedure. They will ban abortion. And so when we're talking about states like New Mexico, Colorado, California, Illinois, the places where the government is not interfering in these personal medical decisions, there is an assumption being made about not only the infrastructure in these places like in New Mexico, but also the access and the ability of people to leave their home state to travel to a state like New Mexico. That means taking time off of work. That means securing childcare, coordinating travel, and raising funds for the care itself. And so the reality is, for many people, they will not be able to even make the decision to leave their state and come to a place like New Mexico. And as we talk about hundreds of thousands, millions of people losing their personal autonomy, their bodily autonomy, and their right to abortion, there's simply no way for states to absorb that need. There simply is no way. And so, I want to drive this home. We are on the precipice of a public health crisis, and not just with respect to abortion. We're talking all reproductive health care is at a real crisis point. And estimates out of leading health organizations anticipate that the maternal morbidity and mortality rate will raise up to 21%.
In my conversations with some of our lawmakers here in Lubbock recently, it is clear that the end of Roe is not the end of their efforts to continue their wish for pro-life legislation. Congressman Arrington told me just this week that he plans to introduce legislation in the House of Representatives to ban abortion at the federal level. There are other conversations among state lawmakers that are considering punishing or providers or women who seek abortion across state lines. How is the ACLU preparing their legal battle in order to fight back against that?
It's an important and a big question. And I'm hearing, there are two things that I'm hearing. One, that the relentless attacks on personal freedom and bodily autonomy are not going anywhere. And so I would encourage us to really interrogate what we think about when we think about legislation that restricts our abilities to make our personal decisions, whether it's medical care, whether it is abortion, reproductive health care, and our personal decisions with respect to our family. And in a state and in a country where we are not guaranteed paid family medical leave, we are facing a childcare affordability crisis. We are just recovering from an infant formula crisis, where we have a sexual violence and domestic violence crisis. When we make the decision to affirmatively create a public health crisis in the midst of a global pandemic and amidst all of these realities, this has nothing to do with the values of family and the values of personal decision-making and independence.
What is the legal argument that the ACLU would use when we look at Texas lawmakers looking at bans across state lines, for example? Because, back before the Texas legislature passed SB 8, a lot of people didn't think that a state could constitutionally pass a ban on abortion that strict at 6 weeks, but they did, and it is upheld legal scrutiny, especially now after Roe. So from your mind as a lawyer, is there any legal basis for a state to in any way prosecute women or providers across state lines for receiving abortions?
These attempts to exert state power and control over the freedom of not only the freedom of movement, but the freedom of the ability to people to make personal medical decisions is not only legally unfounded, but it's practically absurd. And so my answer to that, there is a whole fabric of legal protections, both at the civil, criminal, regulatory, and federal level that prevents and is intended to prevent overreach like this. And we are ready to defend the rights of patients and providers should these efforts be passed and signed into law.
Yeah. Well, if there are women here in Lubbock who are concerned about how the recent Supreme Court decision will affect their right, to not just abortion, but to health care that is provided by places that also provide abortions, what is your message to them? What resources are out there in New Mexico or elsewhere?
So there are a number of resources available to folks that need to access not only abortion care, but reproductive health care more broadly. When we talk about abortion bans, we're talking about more than just the impact on accessing safe and legal abortion. We're talking about the ability to feel safe and secure in their relationships with their medical providers. And this will impact not only how people show up to emergency rooms, but how they show up to their primary care clinicians as well. And so what I will say to folks in Texas, and what I will say to folks watching this, is that New Mexico remains a place where you can access safe and legal abortion, both medication and procedure abortion. And there's a network of abortion funds, both at the federal and state level, the national and state level, that can help folks access the care that they need. Particularly in New Mexico, there are 3 abortion funds: Indigenous Women Rising, the Mariposa Fund, and the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. And the National Network of Abortion Funds also has resources. And so New Mexico will remain a place where folks can make their own private medical decisions, and their choices will be respected.
All right, Ellie Rushforth, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your perspective. We appreciate it.
Sure, thank you so much.
When we come back, these deeply divisive issues are boiling over just months before the midterms. We'll turn to the Texas Politics Project for a unique insight into how Texas voters are feeling. And spoiler alert, it's not great.
You're watching Talking Points, a focus on the political scene in Lubbock and across the South Plains.
Welcome back. Well, the latest polling of likely Texas voters paints a concerning picture for our state. The new numbers from the Texas Politics Project show that most Texans are worse off than they were a year ago. There is not a single positive approval rating for any statewide leader, and a record 59% of Texans say we're on the wrong track. That's all as the race between Governor Abbott and Beto O'Rourke narrows to 6 points. But more interesting than the horse race polls for governor, I think, are the splits that this poll reveals between public opinion and public policy. In some of the most divisive issues of our time, one of the largest divides is between the policies that people would like to see and the policies that ultimately come out of the state capitol. Let's take abortion, for instance. For example, only 15% of Texas voters say that they believe all abortions should be banned. 26% would allow it for the exceptions of rape, incest, or the life of the mother, and more than a third believe that it should be a matter of personal choice, widely available for almost any circumstance. But the law in Texas today is a total ban for all intents and purposes, with no exceptions for rape or incest. Or gun safety, for example. Every potential gun law that the poll included received widespread support, some with very wide margins. You see more than 78% support universal background checks, 2/3 in support of red flag laws that would remove firearms from individuals deemed dangerous, and just over half for raising the age to buy a firearm to 21, just over half again to prevent sales of assault rifles altogether. But currently, none of those policies are the law in Texas, and the legislature shows no signs of seriously considering them next session. Meanwhile, in fact, the only gun law that received disapproval from voters is the permitless carry of handguns. That is the only one on the books in Texas. But even more glaring than that disconnect is that this poll reveals a basic lack of trust in the values that uphold our democratic system. The poll asked for voters' opinions on factual questions that are frankly not matters of opinion, yet many Texans question their basic trust in the legitimacy and in the stability of our politics. See here, 35% of Texas voters believe that Joe Biden was not legitimately elected president. Just over half said that they do believe that he was legitimately elected. That includes more than 2/3 of Republicans who do not believe that. Furthermore, 36% believe that January 6th was not an attempt to overturn the election. And maybe most startlingly, 64% expect that there will be more political violence in the future, including more than 80% of the strongest liberals. Now, some of these are questions in an opinion poll that are neither matters of opinion nor worries that you would hope voters should even have. But of course, the midterms are still 5 months away, and a poll in June is by no means a prediction of how that will go. The Texas Politics Project plans their next statewide poll for this August, and let's hope for some cheerier numbers. When we come back, we'll take a look at the top political headlines for this week. Welcome back. Here's a look at the top political headlines from the past week. The Department of Justice is investigating Texas's border initiative, Operation Lone Star, for potential civil rights violations. The operation has sent more than 10,000 National Guard troops to the border for upwards of $3 billion, and it's arrested thousands of migrants for trespassing. Now the DOJ is looking into complaints from civil rights organizations that the operation subjects those arrested to differential treatment based on race. And Lubbock Representative Dustin Burrows is compelling the Uvalde sheriff to testify in front of his House Investigative Committee into the shooting at Robb Elementary. They sent a notice of deposition to Sheriff Ruben Nolasco, who they say had refused up until Thursday when he got back with Burrows and voluntarily testified. He says that now 19 law enforcement professionals have provided voluntary sworn testimony, and this will be their 20th. Thirdly, Governor Abbott on Thursday issued an executive order authorizing the National Guard and the Department of Public Safety to apprehend immigrants crossing the border illegally and to return them to ports of entry. He accuses the Biden administration of, quote, reckless refusal to secure the border and claims that grants Texas additional powers over the federal border. We were actually at Congressman Arrington's office when this news broke, and he was very excited.
It means that our chief executive and commander-in-chief over Texas basically will take over and fill the gap of border security and immigration enforcement. It's not happening. This governor has done the right thing by the people of Texas, and quite frankly, by the United States citizens, by saying we will do the job that should have been done by the federal government, and we will not risk the safety of our citizens.
Now, that being said, he does expect that order to get held up by an injunction by the Biden administration. And finally this week, back to Uvalde and a new bombshell report from ALERT. That's the Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Center from San Marcos. That report revealed an officer on the scene at Uvalde saw the shooter as he was walking towards the school, but did not shoot him. Our Capitol correspondent Jayla Washington brings us the details from our Austin bureau.
According to this ALERT report, this all happened quick. The officer apparently turned to his supervisor, asked for permission to shoot the gunman after seeing him walk toward the school with the rifle. Then when he turned back around, it was too late, and the gunman wasn't there anymore. The report actually said the officer should have just taken the shot, and I quote, "A reasonable officer would conclude in this case, based upon the totality of the circumstances, that use of deadly force was warranted." Texas code does allow deadly force if an officer thinks it's necessary. According to the report, the officer thought he might misfire and hit the school instead, hurting children. Something else shocking that came out of this report. There was also another officer who was near the gunman before he entered the school. This officer reportedly didn't see him as he was speeding into the parking lot, and according to ALERT, Had the officer been driving more slowly or even parked and approached the school on foot, he would have had a better chance at seeing the gunman and possibly stopping him. Now, there are some major issues here that Alert pointed out outside of what we've already talked about. One, there were teams of officers at both ends of the hallway. This would have created a, quote, crossfire situation. And two, officers did approach the door as the gunman started firing, but then backed up, which goes against Alert's code saying officers are expected to, quote, assume risk and save innocent lives. And now it is worth noting that Alert says they did think officers went into the building quickly and moved towards sounds of gunfire, but lost momentum once they were fired at. Reporting from the newsroom, Jayla Washington, back to you.
Jayla, thank you, and stick around. We're coming back with the last word. And those are your talking points for this week. We thank you for tuning in. As always, send us a comment on our KMAC News Facebook page or at everythinglubbock.com. You can click weekly features and find talking points to stream this and many of our past shows. For all of us on Talking Points, we thank you for watching. See you right here next Sunday.